You can see in your friends the things that you might have a blind spot for yourself, which is remove the plank in your own eye before the speck in someone else. The emotional support part is, that's tricky, right? Because what do you mean by that?
Yeah.
Because do they see that as, oh, I get to see people and connect with them, or I'm having a bad day, I post about it, and then people say, oh, love you, it's okay, tomorrow, and that's what they see as emotional support, because it doesn't jive with then their responses to the negative effects, because the negative effects are depression, anxiety, isolation, all these things that are the opposite of connecting with other people.
Yeah.
And so, and in the article, I don't know if you're going to bring it up, or maybe you're about to bring it up.
Well,
their self-assessment is sometimes different than their assessment of everybody else.
Yes, and that's, I think, very interesting. It's a really good point to highlight here. And so at the end of this section 1, the author, who's one of the researchers, Jonathan Haidt, it's his Substack, but he's, it's his research assistants, writes this. These studies suggest 3 conclusions. Number 1, a large number of young people believe that social media is having a negative impact on the mental health of their cohort. They come to this conclusion more often when invited to consider their peers' experiences instead of their own. Mm-hmm. That, I think, speaks to our own ability to deceive ourselves, to not be honest with ourselves. Right?
Yeah, it's like when we hear a sermon at church, and
like the sermon you heard yesterday,
instead of thinking of ourselves, it's so much easier to be like, oh gosh, Brett needs to work on that so bad. Like
is that really what goes on in your mind when you hear the pastor? Well, I was the pastor. I was the one preaching yesterday at church.
Okay, everyone knows what I mean. It's easier to assess the other people than it is to.
It is.
Of course, and that makes sense.
Oh, I know who needs to hear this message.
Yes. So in that way, it's like, okay, well, we relate to the young people in this survey because it's like, oh yeah, of course, you can see in your friends the things that you might have a blind spot for yourself, which is remove the plank in your own eye before the speck in someone else's, because we see everyone else's specks really good.
Yeah.
And we can oftentimes miss the plank in our eye. So that makes sense in light of knowing human nature.
Yeah. And so there may be a little bit of kind of bracketing off their own assessment of themselves, but then when they assess one another, and maybe they're able to be a little more objective and honest at that point, and you get this picture emerging that they're saying, yeah, when I look at my peers, it's having a negative impact on mental health.
And that to me is, it's so important for us as parents and anyone who's leading the next generation to read these things and to understand their mindset when it comes to it, because I read this stuff, I think about it, you read the books, and Jonathan Haidt always is like following him on Twitter is good because he's always pointing to studies and stuff. And so knowing this stuff is important because for me, it helps me to have compassion, to understand the generation, and then to realize they need our help because obviously the younger you are, the harder it is to see things about yourself. This is something as we mature and grow, we start to recognize our own fallenness more and more. But it's so obvious to me that when they have these honest moments of reflection, which we've had with students too, these kinds of conversations, they are aware of the negative effects, but it's hard for them because they enjoy social media, or it's just so much a part of their life that they need. This is where I think if we're honest, they need our help in navigating it.
They need our leadership.
Yeah.
This is where we as adults and parents and leaders really have to step up. And despite the protests of young people, despite the tantrums that you might get, leading with what we take to be the wise and best course of action.
Mm-hmm.
So that takes some courage.
Yeah, because what we're asking young people to do is to have self-control. It's to know that, oh, this isn't good.
Wait, isn't that what you just said? That's impossible, right? By definition.
No, it's a habit.
A teenager is by definition uncontrolled or lacking in self-control.
No, you don't believe that. So self-control is a habit that is developed over time, and it can be developed in little ways, little decisions we make, and then that helps us in the big areas that we need to exhibit self-control. And so this is why when they're young, we start to teach them how to have self-control in little ways.